A desperate single mother leaves her abandoned baby in the snow at a cold CEO's door, unaware it's payback for their one-night escape that he has long since forgotten. Please, just let me explain. The snow fell in heavy, silent sheets, a sterile white blanket descending upon the city, muffling the world in a profound and unforgiving hush. It clung to the ornate ironwork of the stately gates and gathered in soft drifts against the polished marble steps of the cavernous mansion. A home that felt less like a dwelling and more like a monument to loneliness. Inside, Julian Croft stood before the floor-to-ceiling window of his study, the amber hue of a single desk lamp casting his tall frame in a long, distorted shadow that seemed to stretch into the endless, sterile silence of the room. The relentless, quiet fall of the snow was the only movement in a world he had painstakingly frozen in time, a perfect reflection of the biting cold that had taken permanent residence within his chest years ago. A half-empty glass of scotch sat untouched on his desk, its contents the same shade as the weak light, a testament to an evening spent not in revelry, but in the hollow ritual of remembering a grief that had become his only steady companion. He saw nothing but the swirling flakes, each one a memory he refused to acknowledge, each one a moment of warmth that had long since turned to ice. He was a king in a castle of glass and steel, his heart a shard of the very ice that now coated his world. He was alone. Outside, a figure far more fragile than the pristine snowflakes trembled in the biting wind, her form a desperate, dark shape against the gleaming white. Alara's worn, threadbare coat was a pathetic defense against the cold that seeped into her very bones, a physical manifestation of the despair that had shattered her soul. In her arms, wrapped in the only decent blanket she owned, was a tiny, precious bundle, a life so new it barely registered against the vast, uncaring night. Her tears froze on her pale cheeks, tiny crystals of unbearable sorrow. Every shivering breath was a prayer and a curse, a plea for a strength she no longer possessed. She looked up at the imposing facade of the mansion, a fortress of wealth and power she had only seen once before, on a night that felt like a lifetime ago. A night of an unspoken, seismic connection with a man whose eyes held the same haunted loneliness she saw in her own reflection. She hadn't known who he was then, only that for a few sacred hours, two broken people had found a fleeting warmth in the storm. Now she knew. Julian Croft, a name synonymous with power, a man who could give this innocent child everything she could not. A sob, raw and sharp, caught in her throat, threatening to splinter the fragile resolve holding her together. Her baby, her hope, deserved more than a life on the run, more than a mother with nothing to offer but a hollow, aching love. This was not an abandonment. It was a sacrifice, the greatest and most terrible act of love she could possibly perform. With trembling fingers, she carefully placed the small wicker basket on the top step, tucking a small, tear-stained note into the folds of the soft blanket. She pressed a final, desperate kiss to the baby's forehead, a ghost of warmth against the cold. Her heart fractured. She vanished back into the swirling snow. The soft, insistent sound was so alien in the oppressive silence of the mansion that Julian at first dismissed it as a trick of the wind. But it came again, a thin, reedy cry that seemed to pierce the thick stone walls and the thicker armor around his heart. A flicker of irritation crossed his chiseled features, his privacy so rarely and rudely interrupted. He moved from the window, his expensive shoes making no sound on the plush, dark carpet as he walked through the cavernous foyer, a great hall of polished floors and shadowed portraits of ancestors he'd never known. The sound was clearer here, a desperate, living thing crying out from beyond his heavily fortified front door. He clenched his jaw, expecting a stray animal, a nuisance to be dealt with by his staff in the morning. He pulled open the heavy oak door, a soft click that echoed in the vast space, and the biting cold of the night air rushed in, carrying with it a flurry of white flakes. And then he froze. There, on his doorstep, nestled in a simple wicker basket as if a provincial offering, was a baby. Its tiny face was scrunched and red from the cold and from crying, its impossibly small fists flailing in the air. Julian's mind, a place of crisp calculations and ruthless business strategies, went completely blank. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, the the silence of his life shattered by this impossible, fragile sound. His gaze fell upon the worn blanket, and then to the corner of a small, white envelope tucked within its folds. His hand, usually so steady as it signed deals worth millions, trembled as he reached for it. The paper was damp and cold to the touch, the ink slightly blurred as if from a fallen tear. The handwriting was delicate, yet firm, a script that spoke of a quiet, dignified resolve. He read the few, simple words, and the ice around his heart did not just crack. It splintered into 1,000 pieces. I saw the good in you that night. Please, give her the life I cannot. Her name is Hope, the name echoed in the sterile silence of his mind. A word he had long ago banished from his vocabulary. Hope. He looked down at the infant, whose cries had softened into whimpers, her wide, innocent eyes, the color of a stormy sea, staring up at him with an unnerving, unwavering focus. He didn't know it yet, the narrator's voice might have whispered, but this was not an interruption to his life. This was the moment his life, his real life, finally began. A profound, undeniable feeling, one he couldn't name, rose in his chest. A feeling of awe, of terror, and of a sacred, terrifying responsibility. He carefully lifted the basket, the weight of it both impossibly light and unbearably heavy, and brought it inside, away from the relentless, pounding snow. The heavy door clicked shut, sealing the two of them inside the silent mansion. The world outside vanished. A new one had just been born. He looked down at the child, a perfect stranger who was inextricably his, and a single raw thought broke through the chaos in his mind. He had to find her. He had to find the woman who had trusted a ghost with her entire world. The first days were a blur of sterile efficiency and profound, clumsy tenderness. Julian Croft, the man who could orchestrate a corporate takeover with surgical precision, was utterly lost in the face of this tiny, demanding human. He hired a team of the best pediatric nurses, had a state-of-the-art nursery constructed in a wing of the mansion in what seemed like minutes, and procured every conceivable baby product known to man, all with the same detached, commanding authority he used to run his global empire. Yet, when the nurses had gone for the night and the cavernous house fell back into its familiar, heavy hush, he would find himself standing over the ornate crib, a silent sentinel. The baby, Hope, would sleep, her breathing a soft, rhythmic whisper that was now the mansion's only true sound. He would watch the gentle rise and fall of her chest, a sight so simple and yet so miraculous it made his own chest ache. He was a stranger to this kind of quiet vulnerability, this pure, innocent dependence. His entire life had been a fortress built to keep such feelings out, a legacy of a loveless childhood under the thumb of his matriarchal, cruel mother, Beatrice, who saw emotion as a vulgar weakness. But this child, this small piece of a forgotten night, was a Trojan horse that had breached all his defenses. He found himself learning the specific cadence of her cries, one for hunger, one for comfort, one for the simple existential loneliness of a baby in the dark. He, who had never soothed anyone, learned to rock her gently, his large, capable hands feeling both awkward and perfectly right as they held her small, warm body. Meanwhile, Alara had faded back into the city's anonymous, desperate margins. She found a small, damp room in a rundown boarding house, the kind of place where the walls were thin and soaked with the quiet despair of their occupants. She took a job washing dishes in a greasy diner, the steam and the clatter of plates a welcome distraction from the relentless, hollow echo in her heart. Every baby she saw on the street, every soft cry she heard from a neighboring apartment, was a fresh wound. Her body still ached with the memory of childbirth. Her arms felt unnaturally empty, a physical torment that mirrored the gaping void in her soul. She would stand over the steaming sink for hours, her hands raw and chapped, her mind replaying the moment she walked away into the snow, a decision that felt both absolutely necessary and utterly unbearable. She did not regret giving her daughter a chance at a better life, but the cost of that chance was her own soul. She subsisted on leftovers from the diner, thin soup and stale bread, her own well-being an afterthought. Her only solace was a small, worn photograph she kept hidden in her locket, a blurry picture of Julian she'd surreptitiously taken from a magazine article she found after their night together. She would stare at his face, at the cold, commanding eyes, and force herself to remember the flicker of warmth, the brief, shared moment of unspoken understanding she had seen there. It was that flicker she had bet her daughter's life on. It was her only prayer. Julian's search for Ilara began as a methodical, almost cold-blooded operation. He hired the best private investigators his fortune could buy, giving them only the sparest of details. A first name, a hazy description, and a single tear-stained note. He wanted to find her, not for retribution, but for answers. He needed to understand the woman who had performed such a desperate, selfless act. But as days turned into weeks, and as Hope's presence began to thaw the permafrost around his heart, the nature of his search changed. It became less of an investigation and more of a quest. He started to see the world differently, through the lens of what a struggling single mother might face. He noticed the worn, weary faces of women on the bus, the dilapidated state of shelters and community clinics. On a whim, driven by an impulse he didn't understand, he made a massive, anonymous donation to a network of inner-city women's shelters. He didn't know it, but one of those shelters provided the boarding house where Ilara was staying with a monthly food bank delivery. A small act of grace that kept her from starving. He established a foundation providing free pediatric care in underprivileged neighborhoods, his sleek black car sometimes seen idling on a rundown street as he surveyed the work, his face a mask of detached interest that hid a growing, personal ache. He was searching for one woman, but in doing so, he was beginning to see the suffering of thousands. He was intervening in a world he never knew existed, his vast wealth no longer just a tool for acquiring more power, but a means of casting a net of quiet, anonymous kindness, hoping she might be caught in it. One evening, one of the investigators called with a breakthrough. They had traced a possible match, a woman named Ilara Vance working as a dishwasher at a diner called the Golden Spoon in one of the city's poorest districts. The investigator had a photo, a grainy image taken from a security camera. Julian's breath caught in his throat. It was her. The same gentle face, the same quiet dignity he remembered from that rain-slicked night, though now it was etched with a profound, hollow weariness that twisted something deep inside him. The next day, he drove to the diner himself, his impeccable suit and gleaming car so out of place they were practically an alien spacecraft. He sat in a worn vinyl booth, the air thick with the smell of grease and stale coffee. He watched her through the service window. He saw her steady, unwavering hands working tirelessly, her posture straight despite the exhaustion that was plain to see. He saw another waitress snap at her impatiently, and Ilara simply nodded, her expression unchanging, her dignity a silent, unbreakable shield. He felt a surge of something fierce and protective, an emotion so foreign he could barely process it. He wasn't a savior observing his subject from a distance anymore. He was a man looking at the mother of his child, the woman who had seen a goodness in him he'd never believed he possessed, and his world contracted to this single, profound point. He had to talk to her. He had to close the distance. He left the diner without a word, his mind racing. The quiet observation was over. The time for intervention was about to begin. He returned the next evening, not as Julian Croft, the billionaire CEO, but as a quiet man in a simple coat, his usual commanding aura carefully veiled. The diner was nearly empty, the air heavy with the end-of-day fatigue. He took a seat at the counter, his heart, an organ he usually forgot he possessed, pounding a heavy, unsteady rhythm against his ribs. When Ilara approached, wiping down the counter with a damp cloth, she didn't look up at first. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice soft and tired, a melody of polite weariness. He waited for her to raise her eyes. When she finally did, her hand froze mid-swipe. Recognition flickered in their haunted depths, followed by a wave of pure, unadulterated panic. A plate clattered from her trembling hand, shattering on the worn linoleum floor. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. She gasped, her face turning deathly pale. "You," she whispered, the single word a breath of disbelief and fear. Julian's carefully constructed composure almost cracked at the sight of her raw terror. He hadn't come to accuse her, but his very presence was an indictment. "It's all right," he said, his voice softer than he intended, a low rumble that was meant to be reassuring. "I just wanted to talk." The owner of the diner, a large man with a permanent scowl, stomped out from the back. "Vance, clean that up, and stop bothering the customers," he barked, his voice dripping with disdain. Elara winced as if struck, immediately kneeling to pick up the sharp, broken pieces of ceramic, her dignity warring with her humiliation. Julian stood, the sudden movement drawing the owner's attention. "She wasn't bothering me," Julian stated, his voice now laced with a quiet, steely authority that was impossible to ignore. "I was bothering her. Put the damages on my bill." He placed a crisp $100 bill on the counter, an amount that could likely cover a month's worth of broken plates. The owner's eyes widened. Elara looked up at Julian from the floor, her expression a maelstrom of confusion, shame, and a fragile, burgeoning spark of something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. That night, they sat in his car, the engine a soft hum against the quiet city street. The gleaming, sleek interior of the vehicle was a world away from the greasy diner, a bubble of impossible luxury. Elara sat rigidly, her hands clenched in her lap, her worn coat looking even more threadbare against the supple leather seats. The silence between them was thick with unspoken words, with the weight of the tiny life that connected them. Finally, Julian broke it, his voice carefully neutral. "She's safe. She's healthy. She's perfect." A strangled sob escaped Elara's lips, and she covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with the force of her repressed grief. The sound of her weeping, so raw and heartbroken, was a physical blow to Julian. He didn't offer empty platitudes or awkward pats on the back. Instead, he simply waited, giving her the space to let out the pain she had been carrying alone for so long. He drove her to her boarding house, a grim, dilapidated building that made his jaw tighten with a cold fury. He walked her to the door of her small, damp room. "This is no place for you," he said, the statement flat and absolute. "I have a guest house. It's empty, private. You would be safe there." Elara looked at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, her expression wary. "Why? Why are you doing this?" He met her gaze, his own eyes, usually so guarded, holding a sincerity that was undeniable. "Because you trusted me," he said simply. "You trusted me with the most important thing in your world. That is a debt I can never truly repay, but I have to try." The next day, Elara, with nothing but a small, tattered bag to her name, left the dreary boarding house behind and was driven to the Croft estate, a place that felt like another planet. She was entering the lion's den, not as a conquest, but as an honored yet terrified guest. The guest house was larger and more luxurious than any home Elara had ever imagined, a self-contained haven of soft light, warm fabrics, and quiet solitude. But the real change was seeing Hope again. The nurses brought the baby to her, and the moment Elara took her daughter into her arms, the fractured pieces of her heart seemed to knit back together. She breathed in the sweet, milky scent of her child, tears of cathartic relief streaming down her face. Hope, as if recognizing the scent and feel of her own mother, settled against her instantly, her tiny hand curling around Elara's finger. Julian watched the reunion from the doorway, a silent observer to a scene of such pure, tender love that it felt sacred. He felt like an intruder, a stranger in his own home, witnessing a bond he could never truly be a part of. He would bring Elara meals himself, finding excuses to see her with the baby. They began to talk, first in stilted, cautious sentences, and then with a growing ease. They found themselves in the quiet of the main house's kitchen late one night, after the baby was asleep. The room was dark, save for a soft light over the marble island. Julian made tea, his movements precise and calm. It was there, in the soft hush of the sleeping mansion, that he finally told her about his own past. He spoke of a childhood devoid of warmth, of parents lost too young, and of being raised by his formidable mother, Beatrice, a woman who measured love in stock prices and social standing. He spoke of the crushing loneliness that had been his only inheritance. It wasn't a plea for pity. It was a simple, stark confession. Alara listened with an unwavering, steady gaze that made him feel truly seen for the first time in his life. She didn't offer condolences. She simply absorbed his pain, her presence a quiet, empathetic anchor in the stormy sea of his memory. Then, she shared her own story. She spoke of a loving but poor family, of losing her parents in an accident, and of falling prey to a predatory ex-boyfriend whose debts had forced her onto the streets, pregnant and alone. She spoke of her terror, her desperation, and the single shining memory of a night with a kind, sad-eyed stranger that had given her the insane courage to leave her baby on his doorstep. They were two survivors of different kinds of shipwrecks, now washed ashore on the same island. A bond, forged not in passion but in shared, profound grief, began to form between them. He saw in her an immense, quiet strength, a pure-hearted resilience that humbled him. She saw in him not the cold, commanding CEO the world knew, but the lonely, wounded man who had held her with such gentle reverence that one rainy night. One evening, as they were talking, Hope began to fuss in her bassinet nearby. Alara went to pick her up, but Julian instinctively reached out, his hand gently covering hers on the baby's small body. Their fingers brushed. The contact was electric, a spark of warmth that had nothing to do with desire and everything to do with a deep, unspoken connection. It was a promise of a family, a fragile, beautiful thing taking root in the sterile soil of his mansion. He didn't know that the biggest threat to this budding hope was not in their pasts, but waiting within the very walls of his home, watching and judging with cold, cruel eyes. Beatrice Croft was a woman carved from ice and ambition. She had observed the sudden appearance of the child and, now, this shabby woman, with a growing sense of alarm and disgust. To her, this was not a miracle. It was a scandal, a stain on the immaculate legacy of the Croft name. She had her own investigators dig into Alara's past, and the sordid details they unearthed. The poverty, the ex-boyfriend, the one-night stand with her own son, were all the ammunition she needed. The annual Croft Foundation Charity Gala was the pinnacle of the city's social calendar. A gleaming affair of polished marble floors, glittering chandeliers, and the city's elite. Julian had insisted Alara attend, not as a guest, but as his personal assistant for the evening, a gentle way to introduce her to his world. She wore a simple but elegant dark blue dress he had provided, looking beautiful but feeling deeply out of place amongst the preening, diamond-draped peacocks of high society. The climax arrived when Alara was carrying a tray of champagne flutes through the crowded ballroom. Beatrice, flanked by two of her most sycophantic friends, intercepted her. The older woman's voice was a low, venomous hiss, designed to cut deeper than any shout. "So, this is the little tramp who trapped my son," Beatrice sneered, her eyes raking over Alara with contempt. "Tell me, dear, what was your price? Did you abandon your own child on a freezing doorstep in the hopes of a payday?" The words, sharp and cruel, struck Alara with the force of a physical blow. The tray trembled in her hands. Guests nearby turned to stare, their expressions a mixture of shock and cruel curiosity. Alara's face went white, but she held her chin high, her voice a quiet, dignified whisper. "You don't know anything about me," Beatrice laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "I know you're a gutter rat who saw an opportunity. You are nothing. You do not belong here." With a final, vicious glance, she deliberately knocked the tray from Alara's hands. The champagne flutes shattered on the polished floor, the sound echoing through the suddenly silent ballroom. Total silence. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Alara stood, frozen in a pool of champagne and broken glass, the epicenter of a hurricane of public humiliation. Her face was a mask of shattered pride, her eyes glistening with tears she refused to let fall. She was exposed, judged, and condemned. But just as Beatrice was about to deliver another verbal blow, a voice, calm but imbued with a commanding power that parted the crowd like the Red Sea, cut through the tension. "That's enough, Mother." Julian was there. He moved through the onlookers not with anger, but with a chilling, focused calm that was far more terrifying. He didn't spare a glance for his mother. His eyes were only on Alara, his expression one of profound, unwavering support. He walked directly to her, ignoring the broken glass, and gently took her arm, pulling her to his side. Then, he turned to face the silent, waiting audience, his arm protectively around Alara's shoulders. His voice, now amplified by the microphone, a stunned event manager handed him, echoed through the cavernous hall. "For those of you who are enjoying this little spectacle," he began, his gaze sweeping across the room, cold and sharp as a shard of ice. "Allow me to clarify a few things," he paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "This woman, Alara Vance, is not my employee. She is not a stranger. She is the mother of my daughter." A collective gasp went through the ballroom. Beatrice's face contorted in a mask of fury. "And far from being a tramp who trapped me," Julian continued, his voice ringing with absolute conviction. "She is the strongest, most selfless, and most dignified person I have ever known. She made an impossible choice, a sacrifice that I spend every day trying to be worthy of. She trusted me when I was nothing but a ghost, and she brought life and hope back into a house that had been a tomb for years." He looked directly at his mother, his eyes blazing. "You speak of belonging. Alara and my daughter, Hope, belong with me. They are my family. It is you, with your venom and your cruelty, who does not belong in our lives." He then looked back at Alara, his expression softening into one of raw, tender vulnerability. In front of hundreds of the city's most powerful people, he tilted her chin up gently. "I love you, Alara," he said, his voice cracking with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. "I think I started falling in love with you on a rainy night a lifetime ago, and I have been falling ever since." He leaned in and kissed her. A gentle, profound kiss that was both a declaration and a promise. The power dynamic had not just been reversed, it had been utterly annihilated. 1 year later, the golden glow of a late afternoon sun streamed through the large windows of the mansion. But the light was different now. It was no longer sterile or cold. It was warm, filled with the soft sounds of life. The cavernous rooms, once echoing with silence, were now home to the delightful chaos of a child's laughter. In the sprawling backyard, Julian pushed a squealing Hope on a swing. His face, once a mask of cold indifference, now relaxed and lit with a genuine, easy smile. He was no longer just a CEO. He was a father, a partner, a man redeemed by a love he never thought he deserved. Alara sat on a nearby blanket, a book resting in her lap, watching them. She was no longer the haunted, weary woman from the diner. She was radiant, her quiet strength now a source of serene confidence. The shadows were gone from her eyes, replaced by a deep, abiding joy. She had not only found security and love, but she had also found her purpose. With Julian's full backing, she was now the head of the Croft Foundation, using her own experiences of hardship to direct its vast resources with a compassion and understanding that no one else could. She was changing the lives of thousands of women just like her, turning her own suffering into a wellspring of hope for others. Julian left the swing set and sat beside her on the blanket, pulling her into a gentle embrace. Hope waddled over, her small hands clutching a bright yellow rattle, and collapsed happily into their laps. This was their life now, not a fantasy, but a hard-won reality built on a foundation of shared vulnerability and profound, unconditional love. They were a family not of circumstance but of choice. Perfect, beautiful choice. The quiet click of the rattle was the only sound. It was everything. This story, at its heart, is a fable about the unseen connections that bind us and the transformative power of a single, selfless act of kindness. It reminds us that even in the depths of our most profound despair, when we feel most alone and have the least to give, a gesture of pure, unselfish love can set in motion a series of events so miraculous they can thaw a frozen heart and build a new world. Alara, in her most desperate hour, did not curse the darkness. She entrusted her only light to a stranger, betting everything on a flicker of goodness she once saw in his eyes. Julian, a man imprisoned by wealth and grief, was saved not by his power, but by the unexpected weight of a tiny, innocent life left in his care. Their journey shows us that true wealth is not measured in stock portfolios or stately mansions, but in the courage to love, the grace to forgive, and the strength to build a family from the most broken of pieces. If this story touched your heart, it's because it speaks to a universal truth we all carry inside us. The deep-seated belief that kindness is never wasted and that love is the most powerful force for redemption in the universe. It is a testament to the idea that everyone, no matter how lost or broken they may seem, carries the potential for profound goodness, waiting for the right moment, the right person, to awaken it. We all have the capacity to be both the virtuous sufferer and the hidden savior in our own lives and in the lives of others. We invite you to carry the spirit of this story with you. For more soul-stirring tales of love, sacrifice, and redemption that will warm your heart and inspire your soul, please like, share, and subscribe to Soulful Love Tales. We'll see you in the next one.